Second. Here we are. Okay, so we are on our third session of Israel introduction. The first one was about on the way to Israel become a country, a state. The other one was about Israel borders. And this one is going to be dedicated, the next 45 minutes going to be dedicated for the demography of Israel, about the society, different population that live in Israel. And I believe that once people understand the demography of Israel, it will help to understand very profoundly the situation in Israel and basically all the news and the current events. Before that, I'm just reminding you some technical stuff. So on the lower part, we have the reactions. First of all, with your permission, I'm going to mute everyone. All right, everyone are muted now. But every time you'll have a question, so you can use the lower bar, and you have a sign which is a chat. So you can leave a question over there. And I think in about 15, 20 minutes, I'm gonna make a pause, and then I can read your question and can respond. Also, every now and again, if you want to make any kind of response or reaction, so you have another toolbar, which is a reaction on the right side, right? If you press on it, you can see you have like claps and also like. So, it's super fun. I can ask you something and just to see that you're with me and that you keep following. So, you can press those kind of marks. And basically, I think this is it. Pastors, in case you want to start with a short prayer, I'll be more than happy. So you can just open you can unmute yourself.
All right, let's get started. First of all, thank you for helping us. Father, in the name of Jesus, we thank you and praise you, Father, for your goodness, for your grace, your love. Thank you for today, Lord God, that you're going to teach us about Israel. Father, that's your ground, that's your property, that's yours. It's been given to your people. And I thank you, Father, that you're going to enlighten us. Revelation from you, from your word, God, that we're going to learn more. And I thank you, Father, for Javier, and I thank you for his love for you and his love for your country. And I pray, God, that you would speak through him, that we might be enlightened, Father, with your word in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Okay, guys, so let's dive into our tour. All right, here we are. All right, this is a satellite look. It's pretty easy to recognize the area of Israel, okay? Because here we have like a form which looks like a snail. This is basically the Red Sea, and when we dive in, so we have the Red Sea, and then we have the Suez Canal, and then Israel, and then the Sinai Peninsula is located between them. If we go a little bit up, we're already in the part of Israel, all right? And Israel, about the demography, so there are about 9 million people live in Israel, residents. I'm not including the Palestinian Authority, even though I'm gonna show some parts of the Palestinian Authority. Basically, what I am referring to are the areas which consider under Israel government. All right. So overall, we have 9 million people, and 75% of them are Jewish. Okay. So it's about 7 million, and then the other 21% are Muslims, and the rest of them are minorities. So what we'll do, basically, we're gonna run through different sites, and which related to the different population. We're gonna give a little bit background about it, and then from time to time we can give time for questions. And eventually, the whole idea is that you understand the relations between those kind of sectors and denomination. All right, so I already started with the Jewish population. Israel is a Jewish democracy, which are two terms that holding attention between them, because democracy is supposed to be a place which is equal for everyone. But on the other hand, Israel is considered to be a country which related to the Jewish people. That is why Jewish from every part of the world, they have the right to immigrate to Israel. And then, they have like the whole assistant, and immediately, automatically, they get a citizenship. All right. So basically, it's a tension that we hold here. And we're going to start with the Jewish population. Okay. Now, among the Jewish population, there is also a couple of division. Right. So I chose the old city. Okay. This is a Jewish quarter. This is one of the sign mark of the Jewish quarter. This is a synagogue named the Destruction, because it's been destroyed 3 times since 1700. Anyway, in that area of the old city, okay, here basically we see tourist people, but mainly the people who lives here are people who are more religious. Now, even among the religious, we have different separation and definitions, but basically we can say that among the 7 million Jewish people, they're about 30% religious, and then the rest of them are non-religious. They're considered to be more traditional or non-practicers at all. In the old city, for example, it's a place which more affiliated to ultra-Orthodox. Now, by saying that, a place which is even more related to ultra-Orthodox will be a city named Bnei Brak. All right, let's go over there. All right, guys, just a little bit. I know I explained it on the previous time, but basically Israel is divided between the coastal lane, right? Now, the majority of the Jewish people live here in the coastal lane. Then we have the mountain range, which most of the Muslim lives here. And then we have the area of the Jordan Valley, all right, which is beyond the mountains area. And we have a couple of the lowest places in the world, such as the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. And now I'm going to a city named Bnei Brak because it's a great example of the ultra-Orthodox population. Let's dive into Bnei Brak. So among the Jewish population, 15% considered to be ultra-Orthodox. They're the one wearing black, they're Hasidic. They're not identifying with the idea, the state of Israel. That is why they're not joining, they're not recruiting to the military. They're not doing any military service. For them, even, it's kind of a blasphemy to have a state like the state of Israel, which is a secular, the government is secular. So there are a lot of tension with the ultra-Orthodox. These days, they're nominating almost 500,000 people, right? So Bnei Brak is a good example for where the ultra-Orthodox live. Another place which is very famous, and it's also, it's a cool place. I used to go there to take special clients, like when I used to have like small groups. So it's a neighborhood in Jerusalem named Mea Shearim. Mea Shearim, it's like the Israeli version for Brooklyn, but like the old version of Brooklyn. You have like ultra-Orthodox neighborhood all over. If you're non-religious, it's in some of the area, it might be even, I don't want to use the word danger, but you know, it's a place that you have to understand their codes, okay? So this is one thing among the Jewish population. So as we said before, we have 7 million people, 15% out of them are ultra-Orthodox. But then on the other side of the map, we have the secular, all right? Now the secular can run between traditionals or people who are non-practicers at all, and Tel Aviv will be the great example for that, right? Tel Aviv, there are about 500,000 people live in the city of Tel Aviv, but in the metropolis surrounding Tel Aviv, it goes up all the way almost to 3.5 million, right? So here we can see girls wearing skirts. This street, by the way, it's the Rothschild Avenue. It's the high-tech area. A lot of coffee shops, a lot of restaurants in this area. By the way, the House of Independence is also located here in this place, which means that in 1948, the announcement of the independence of Israel was declared here in Rothschild Avenue. If we want another place which can represent the secular population, just go to the beaches of the coastal lane or the beaches of Tel Aviv. There you can feel like you're in any other Western country in the world. Very liberal area. What I want to do, I want to show you some photos. 1 second. All right, so this is one thing, which is not necessarily represent the whole state of Israel, but it definitely represent the area of Tel Aviv. We can see a gay parade, and in Tel Aviv, there is one of the biggest gay parade in the Middle East, right? So it's just something which kind of reflect how the city life goes by in that area, while in Jerusalem, it will be a little bit more complicated to have this kind of parade. And here we can see also people sitting and drinking coffee. So it's more about the culinary and restaurants and shop. And we can see the high techs and you know, like the whole all the modern buildings. This, by the way, it's Israeli. It's one of the most famous sites in the area of Tel Aviv. So this is basically in the area of the coastal lane. This is where you're gonna find most of the, or obviously the high-tech ways. It's just an example of application that being created in the area of Tel Aviv. So basically, this is something. This is a spirit you can find in the area of Tel Aviv, which represent the secular part, the secular side of Israel. Another thing, another kind of population. So what I'm repeating, what I'm doing now, basically I'm explaining about the Jewish population, and then I'm like doing a zoom in. I'm going into details about the different population of the Jewish population. And then after we'll go through the Muslims and some other minorities such as Christians, Druze, and more. So another type of population, of Jewish population, is you can find in the area of Zichron Yaakov. Zichron Yaakov, I mean, basically here it's also a secular area. The only reason I chose it is because here, if you remember the tour that I gave you about the Israel, the way to become a country. So I was mentioning Zichron Yaakov is one of the first places where the pioneers came to, right? So it's kind of, I would say, like kind of an outdoor area, very European style, because it was sponsored by the Edmund Rothschild, the one we can see here in the photo. But anyway, the reason I chose it is because the pioneers were very different by their mentality from the people who went to Tel Aviv. They came to Israel in 1882. They had a strong Zionist conscience, and they were about working the agriculture and fields. Later on, they became very urban. But I just wanted to show the difference between people who went to a city such as Tel Aviv, because from the first place, they were looking for commodity, and people who came from different agenda. They wanted to be more pioneers. So anyway, Zichron Yaakov is another place which considered to be a secular area. Another form of life which is really, really unique to the state of Israel. It's not as it used to be in the past, but still something of it still left up to our days. It's the form of kibbutz life. Have you ever heard about kibbutz? If you heard about it, please press like. Now I can test your technology abilities. All right. So if you remember, you have the lower bar, right? And in the lower bar, you have the reaction on the right. So that will help me to understand if you're, like if we are on the same page. Anyway, okay, Nan's saying, I can't hear you, but I imagine that you're saying something. You see collapse. All right. Okay, let's drop it for now.
Wait, Adiel.
Yeah.
I don't have it. Where is it?
All right.
So that you can press like.
Do you see the toolbar? Do you see where the camera and the audio is on the lower level? So on the right side, you have like a smiley and a word and the letters saying reactions. You can't see it? Here, now Pastor Dan just give us a clap.
It might be under more, where there's 3 dots and it says more, M-O-R-E. Do you have that?
Let's see.
Because that's where we found it, under more.
All right. All right. Well, in my case, I have it straight away, but maybe, yeah, maybe you should press some more. It's but basically you have the toolbar and then you have the chat, and it's supposed to be on the right part of the chat. But even if not, you know, we can live without it. It's just a nice, you know, just a nice tool. All right, guys. So with your permission, let's go back to the Google Earth. Right. So the kibbutz it's another form of life. The people who went there, they were also pioneers. They were from the second immigration. They went there in started in 1903. And then they were very young, and they wanted to create a form of life where they can support one another. Their families still lived in Russia. So basically, they created a community which they had like a sharing fund, and everyone used to work in the kibbutz. They were not earning money, and something which is really typical for the kibbutz is that they used to have agriculture around them. And now that is related to the idea that they wanted to cultivate the land exactly same as the Bible time. So they came with a strong ideology. I want to show you some photos about it. So okay, here we can see how they have like a communal life, right? They have the gardens in the middle of the kibbutz. Here we can see some agricultures and some palm trees. This is a little bit vague, but what we can see here are the pioneers, how they came in the early days and basically built everything from scratch. So it's another form of life. So far, we saw where the major population of the secular population located, which is the coastal lane, and to be particular, Tel Aviv. And then we were mentioning the ultra-Orthodox in Bnei Brak and also in Mea Shearim. And now we saw the kibbutz, and also Zichron Yaakov, which is where the first immigration came, first wave of immigration. One second, we have here, okay, on the chat. So we have a question. All right, let's make a stop now for like 2 minutes for questions. And Cindy is asking, are the people living in the kibbutz religious or secular or a mix? It's a great question. Most of the kibbutz, a majority of them, they came with the ideology of secular movement, right? Their way to like realize themselves was to work the land. So for them, working the land was almost same as religious. But then at some point, some people also with the same Zionist consciousness came to Israel, but they were religious. So there are some few kibbutz who are religious, but the grand majority are secular. Very good question. All right, anybody else want to use this pause for asking anything about Tel Aviv or ultra-Orthodox or all right. Okay.
Ariel.
Yeah.
Sorry. I've always understood that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Would it stand reason to believe then that they would be the only ones that would have such secularism in the form of the gay parade you mentioned and things like that?
Sorry, I didn't understand the connection. How the gay parade? Okay, of course. Look, to being honest, being you know, belong to this kind of community on the neighboring countries of Israel could be almost a death penalty, right? So in Israel, and we'll get to that further on, also the minorities and the different religions have the freedom to practice, you know, their own religious. And it's the same about different kind of communities, and applicable also for the gays. The reason that Israel is a democracy give them the right to obviously to live their form of life. So yeah, it's a good connection that you made here. Good link. All right, guys. So here, by the way, I chose a kibbutz named Degania. Degania is the first kibbutz that's been established in the state of Israel. And by the way, the whole idea of kibbutz, it's something that's been formed and started and flourished in the state of Israel. All right, so let's do a little bit zoom out. Ganya, by the way, it's adjacent to the Sea of Galilee. It's a beautiful, beautiful area. It's also very close. It's about 5 minutes drive from the baptism site that we went together on our tour. Another form of life, we're still on the Jewish population, is a moshav. So in Israel, you cannot be the farmer Tom, or, you know, as you have in the United States. In Israel, the only way to live on the open area and work in agriculture is being part of a community. So one community is one of a kibbutz, the other one is of a moshav. So I chose Nahalal because Nahalal is the first moshav that's been established in Israel. It's pretty much, I would say, in the area of Nazareth, Nahalal, but there are more moshav all over, scattered all over the country. And the difference between moshav and a kibbutz is that kibbutz, and I'm saying originally because the whole idea of kibbutz changed basically starting from the 80s. They suffered from economical loss, and then most of them became like a normal communities. But I would say that the original idea of moshav comparing to kibbutz is that moshav people were more individual farmers, but living in a community. So basically, each one of them had his own crop, and then they used to sell their crop in a cooperation, and each one gained his own share. While kibbutz, they did not even used to earn any money. They used to live in a kibbutz, work in different branches in the kibbutz, and eventually they used to. But on the other hand, they used to have all the services, get all the services from the kibbutz. By the way, I'm always pointing out that the kibbutz is very similar to the early stages and forms of life of the Christians. The Christians in the beginning, they used to live together. They used to share their fund. They were even used to, in some areas, maybe do agriculture. So it's something which is really similar in that sense. The only difference is that kibbutz is the original form is secular. Okay, so Nahalal is, as I just mentioned, is a moshav. And all right, another form of another type of Jewish people are the one who live in the area of the West Bank. All right, now let's stop in that point for a second, even though we already explained that in the other tour of the borders. So Israel has, I would say that there are some parts which related to the state of Israel start from 1948, and then there are some parts which been annexed to Israel in 1967, and the West Bank is one of them. So it's like a semicircle. Let's see if we can see it. Basically, it's a semicircle which go like this, more or less from the mid part of the Dead Sea going up to the mountain range, and then going north, and then going, okay, here we can see the line of it. Here it is. This is the West Bank. It goes all the way down to the area of the Jordan Valley. And here we can see how it goes towards south. And at some point, it's go down all the way to the mid part of the Dead Sea. Now, in the West Bank, which is an area that been occupied by Israel from Jordan after 1967 as a response to the Jordanian aggression, in the West Bank, there are the Palestinian Authority, but also Jewish settlers. So there are about 500,000 Jewish people that live in that area. And one of the places that I'll choose is a city named Ma'ale Adumim. Now, the people who live over there, they have a strong, okay, let's go 1 second. I want to put it on a photo. They have a strong, no, hold on. This is not what I'm looking for. No. Right. So the people who live in the West Bank, obviously, they're a big supporter of the state of Israel. And according to their agenda, Israel is supposed to be, we call it in Hebrew, Eretz Yisrael Shlema, which means the United State of Israel. And that is because some people from the left wing, they would like to give up some lands and territory from the West Bank, while the people the settlers in the West Bank, they believe that the West Bank is supposed to be part of the United Israel. So I would like to show you. Okay, here it is. Here it is. So this is a city named Ma'ale Adumim, just 10 minutes drive from Jerusalem. Once you cross it, you're already in that area. It was on the news a couple of times when Barack Obama was governing, so he made some restriction. He didn't want people to make extension in the area and to build more and to expand. But on the other hand, it's just an example how there are thousands of Jewish people lives in those kinds of areas. Okay, again, this is not okay. And okay, this is what I'm looking for. And now we're diving in into the street area. So this is how it's look like. The places in the West Bank, the Jewish settlement, they're like very new, very modern. And this is how the settlers look like. They're religious mostly, more National Orthodox. National Orthodox is totally different from Ultra-Orthodox because they believe in the idea of the state of Israel. On reverse to the Ultra-Orthodox. So we can see there. Okay, here we can see some settlers while they're building the settlements. All right, they're considered to be on the right wing. They're big supporters of Benjamin Netanyahu, or even more right than Benjamin Netanyahu. Right. So this is more or less cover the ideas and settlements of the Jewish population. Before we'll go to the Muslim population, any questions so far? Maybe, I don't know, maybe about the kibbutz, maybe about the moshav, maybe about the secular population, maybe about the settlements. If you have any kind of question, feel free to ask. Basically, what I was trying to do is to cover the different sites and places and geography places where the 7 million Jewish people lives. And I was trying also to give the resolution, the different type of Jewish people who lives in Israel. All right, let's see if we have any.
Adiel.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the ultra Orthodox do not believe in the state of Israel. Is that what you said?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah?
Correct. So the story goes that 100 years ago, when the Zionist movement started, and the main idea was to bring the Jewish people back to the lands of Israel. So for the ultra-Orthodox, that's considered to be almost a blasphemy, because they believe that and they're also quoting some verses in the Bible, that the only way to establish a land of Israel is by the Messiah, right? So they believe that you're supposed to be passive. The Messiah will come. He's going to establish the land of Israel, and then after the return to Israel will be happen by itself. While the National Orthodox, for example, they're religious, they're practicers, but they believe that the Messiah time is already happening, even now, and we're helping to the Messiah to come. You have to be active, right? So it's a different approach. That is why they're also joining to the military. Also in the Independence Day, they're making a special prayer for the state of Israel. So it's like a major gap that those two kind of sectors holding between them. That's a good question.
Thank you.
My pleasure. So guys, let's go now back to let's speak a little bit about the Muslims. Okay, because also among the Muslims
are a question. Oops, sorry, I sent in a quick question on the chat.
On the chat. Let's see.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. How long have Jewish families lived in the West Bank area? This is Melissa. Right. So starting from 1967. So in 1967, there was a 6-day war, and Israel had been attacked by 3 countries at the same time: Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. Israel occupied from Egypt the area of Sinai and gave it back in the 80s on the peace treaty. And then the Golan Heights from the Syrian, which is still under Israel hand, and the West Bank, which been occupied from the Jordanian. And with the West Bank, with the occupation of the West Bank, 3 million Palestinians were at that point under Israel government. And starting from that point, also Jewish people started to go and build settlements in that area. We have to understand that if we go back 2,000 years ago, I'm not taking any side. I'm just trying to represent the side of the settlers. So the Bible time, most of the tribes, they used to live in the mountain range where the West Bank is today. And there is also a lot of archaeology from the time of the different tribes. So that is why they believe, their view is that the West Bank is also supposed to be under Israel, the land of Israel. So this is mainly their approach toward that. Okay, I would like to go now to speak a little bit about the Muslims. And again, now I chose the Muslim quarter. There are a couple of areas where the Muslims lives in Israel. There are 21% Muslims, most of them religious or traditional. Anyone can recognize these spots, by the way? Who want to try while I'm sipping my water? Okay, I think we went there. It's the Damascus Gate, right? The Damascus Gate is located on the eastern part of the old city. If we go closer, we can see mainly Arabs walking here. So it's a traditional society. They have their own schools. They have their own political parties. Let's see a little bit of the photos. So if you remember, we were talking about it when we spoke about the Israel borders, and we're saying that in 1948, there was a civil war between the Arabs and the Jewish people. Starting from that point, okay, so some of them became refugees. About 600,000 people left their houses and went to the neighboring countries, and they could never return. Some went to the area of the West Bank, and some stayed in the area of Israel from 1948. And they're holding okay, here we can see the refugees. Here we can see the different maps. Over here in the middle, we can see the West Bank. We can see that, hold on, all right. So basically what I wanted to show you that on the half circle of the West Bank, this is where the Palestinians live. It's very important to understand that differentiation. Palestinians are the one who live inside the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority, all right? So they cannot enter to the state of Israel unless they have a special permission to work in Israel, and that will be only for 1 day normally. While there are Israeli Arabs, which is a totally different definition. These Arabs are under the land, okay, they're here, okay? So they're under the territory and government of Israel starting from 1948. And they have every right that any other Jew have in Israel. Obviously, they're aspiring to have, there was a gap in the early years between the Jewish and the Arab population, but now the gap is hopefully is closing. It's take time, but basically, according to the law, they have equal rights, okay? So those Arabs live here in these areas, mainly in the mountain range. Now let's go back and I'll show you, let's look at it in the satellite area. Okay, so for example, another place beside Jerusalem where you can find Arab population, Arab Israel is Jaffa. Okay, now Jaffa is, have we been together in Jaffa? I don't remember. No, we didn't go to Jaffa. Also look, in the next week, I want to do another tour, and I want to cover the famous sites. That's how I'm going to call it, famous touristic sites in Israel. And if we have time, maybe even non-touristic. But basically, Jaffa is also very, very important on the tourism map. And it used to be, before 1948, the largest Arab city. There used to be there about 60,000 Arabs. These days, there are still a few thousands who live in this area. Another city where you can, where you have populations, where you have our population, for example. Jaffa, by the way, it's a mixed city, okay? So Jerusalem, Jaffa, Acre, they're all cities where you have, this is the old city of Acre. Beautiful area, by the way. Well, when you go there, you can see some ruins from the Crusader time. But what I'm trying to represent now is the idea that there are places where you have a mixed population, Jewish, Arabs, Christians. So Acre, Jaffa, and Jerusalem, and Haifa also are a great example for that. And then we have places where you can find only Arabs. For example, Taibe. Okay, Taibe is a city which is in the Israel territory, but it's also adjacent to the West Bank. I'm going to zoom out. Okay, I'm going to north it. Okay, so this area is the West Bank, this circle, and Taibe is really adjacent to it. You can see how it's circularized with this red line. Let's dive in, and then you can have a sense of how the city looks from the inside. Woo! We're going to the streets area. All right, so we can see minarets, we can see mosques. The houses, they are totally different from Israeli Jewish style, because they're still living patriarchal methods or form. Every family still live together with their parents, and then they're built one next to each other. So they also build in very individual way. All right, and basically here in this area you have like in a city such as Taipei, you can find only Arabs, Arab population. All right. Another place, which is a little bit out of our subject, but I want to give you the different angles. It's inside the Palestinian Authority. All right, so if you remember, we have the West Bank, which is this half semicircle, right? In the West Bank, we have different zones. In some of the zones, you can find Israeli settlers and population, but then you have the Palestinian Authority. And in the Palestinian Authority, you can find only Palestinian. And Israelis such as myself, we cannot go in. Now, Ramallah, it's a city that I chose because it's a capital of the Palestinian Authority. One second, I want to show you just maybe a little bit from the presentation. So here we can see the president of the Palestinian Authority. We can see him in 2 seconds. Abu Mazen. 1 second. Here he is. And we can see the Palestinian flag. Though it's important to underline that the Palestinian Authority, it's not a country, even though they have a flag and they have an anthem. It's not a country because they do not have a military, they don't have airport, they do not have their own passports. Anyway, the people who live over there, they're Palestinians. And as I mentioned before, they cannot enter to Israel unless they have a special permission, right? So there is a big difference between the Arab Israelis and the Palestinians. Being honest, the Palestinians to some extent look at the Arab Israelis as traitors, even though the Arab Israelis are trying to show that they're resenting the idea of the land of Israel. The fact is that they live here in a more advanced country in very good condition, and the Palestinian on the other hand, they live under a corrupt government. So they kind of feel resentment toward their brothers who live in the land, in the state of Israel. All right, and another area, another mixed city is Nazareth. And the reason I chose also Nazareth is because that's bring us also to the Christian issue, Christian subject of the land of Israel. Hold on. Anyone recognize this church? Church of Annunciation, right? So basically over here in Nazareth, you have about one third of the population are Christians, and the other 2/3 are Muslims. The Christians will be Arab Christians, which means they speak Arabic. Their ethnic is Arab, but they're practicing Christianity. And there are about 160,000 Christians in Israel, right? They can celebrate. They have the freedom, obviously, to celebrate their religious, which is opposed to the other countries around us. That is why you can see a lot of churches spread all over the country. Here we are, for example, in Haifa. Haifa is another, excuse me?
Adiel.
Yeah.
You know something that, and this is just kind of a thought, when we went through Nazareth, remember we just drove through Nazareth on the tour. But one of the things I noticed was dirty. Do you remember there was trash and everything?
Yeah.
Does that?
So the thing about it is that the fact is that the Arab cities, I would say their infrastructure are less developed than the Israelis one, than the Jewish one. And there are two reasons for that. One is because they're older, all right? So like expanding roads in that area, it's a little bit more complicated. The other one is the economic situation of the people over there is, I would say, is not as good as some other cities in the coastal lane. So people have less awareness of maintaining the city. But it's not only that. The fact is, and I'm trying to be very careful about it because I'm also a tour guide, but leaving that hat for a moment, the fact is that in some areas, they're getting less budgets than other places. And it's something that the state of Israel at some point will have to solve, about that equality. On the other hand,
But here's that Pastor Dan and Melissa and Cindy and I will understand. It reminded me of Mexico because like there was trash. I mean, I thought, why do they have all that trash on the street? Do you remember that?
I think it's a combination of those two reasons. One is all the budgets and the infrastructure are not as advanced as other parts of the country, and the other one is that it took time because in the early stages of the foundation of Israel, there was a big gap between the Jewish people and the Arabs because there was a lot of suspicions between the two sides, and that is why the Israel government gave less budget to basically till 1967. The Arab were under a military definition. They were not a normal citizen. So it's already almost 20 years of a gap. And it's only in the last 20 years that they started to go to academies and started to be more scholars and more, and those kind of things matter. Those kind of things matter. Eventually, if they'll keep going to academy, and now they're going to academy and starting to blend into more different kind of government position. So eventually, I hope that we'll see the result, the outcome, and also in their livelihood areas.
Okay, and one other thing, in Del Rio we had a couple of families that were from Nazareth, and this is more for Melissa and Dan and Cindy. They were Orthodox Christians, y'all. They were like more like they were Catholic, Orthodox Catholics. Okay, which is a little, we are all of the Protestant persuasion. So anyway, just different. Okay. Different than what we're accustomed to, but really nice people. But anyway, they were all from Nazareth. Okay, I'm going to turn mine off, I promise.
I think, but you made a really great point about the Christian in Israel. So they're basically divided between Catholic and Orthodox. I think it's only in the recent years that the Catholic are. I think there is a majority for a Catholic. Then again, same majority. Eventually, we were talking about only 160,000. The population is really small. But I think there are more Catholic than Orthodox. Even though we have to remember that this area, the land of Israel, the Holy Land, was always affiliated to the Byzantine area, right? So that is why it was more affiliated to Greek Orthodox. And then it's only from the Crusader time that there started to be infiltration of Catholic to this area. But it's a really good point. So yeah, this is mainly about that, about the Christian. As far as I know, I think there are also some Protestants, but it's like really minority, right?
Really small.
Yeah, it's really, yeah.
It's Orthodox Christians, Orthodox Catholics, the Roman Catholics, and then the Protestant. And really what we saw more of when we were with you was the Roman Catholic churches, okay? Do you agree?
All right, okay, that brings us to, but this is more about the pilgrimage. This is more about the pilgrimage that the Franciscan, they're considered to be the one who are the guardian of the holy sites in Israel. And they were here already from the last episode of the Crusaders. The Crusaders were here between the 11th and 13th century, which means they already had an early presence, 800 years ago. And from that point, they started to build churches. So yeah, the grand majority of churches that we'll see in Israel will be related to the Catholic, even though there are also a lot of Greek Orthodox churches in Israel. There is one type of tourism for Catholic, another one for Greek Orthodox. They go to different churches, and then evangelical, which in many cases they would not even want to go into the churches. So yeah, this is about that. But I think it can be maybe it can be a whole tour by itself about the different Christian in Israel or pilgrimage in Israel, different sites of pilgrimage. It's a good idea. I would like to focus on another minorities, because so far we were saying that they're 75%, and I don't want to take it too long, because we're already almost 1 hour, and I don't want you to feel overloaded with information. But so far, okay, I'm going to summarize. Okay, so we're talking about 75% Jewish, 21% Muslims, and then the rest of the minorities are Christians. Another minorities, which I'm not going to stop, I'm just going to show you the photo of it because it's a beautiful area, and this is what we started our conversation with, are the Baha'is garden. So there are no Baha'is live in Israel, but their most sacred places located. Okay, what happened? 1 second. Their most sacred places located here. 1 second. It's got wild. Let's see. Here it is. So some of their most sacred places located here. Here it is. This is one of the most famous sites on the tourism map, and this is where they believe their prophet. It's a culture, it's a religion that been divided from Islam on the 19th century from Iran, and their prophets and founders came and lived in Israel, and their tomb are located here. So if so far it's not only the most important place for Christian and Jewish people, and also to some extent for Muslim, now we know that there are more denominations that cherish a lot the land of Israel, such as the Baha'is. I'm not going to elaborate about them because there is not a real community of Baha'is that live here. A minority that I do want to say some few words about them are the Druze. Okay, the Druze, they live in a couple of parts of Israel, in the Galilee area mainly, and they're considered to be alliance of the Jewish people. They're joining to the military, and they divided also from Islam in the 11th century. Here we can see a Druze hospitality. This is a Druze flag alongside the Israeli flag, and basically they're considered to be alliance of Israel. So the Druze is also a fascinating story. They believe in reincarnation. Only 10% out of their population are aware about the pillars of their religious, while the other 90%, they don't have a clue, because once they're getting into adolescence, when they turn to 13, 14 years old, they have the choice to become religious or non-religious. And if you are religious, that give you the privilege to read their books. If not, basically it's a mystery. It's a mysterious religious. So I also wanted to dedicate a few words about the Druze, about 160,000 of them that live in Israel because of their tie relationships with the Israel, with the Jewish population. Another population lives here are the Bedouins. Nobody really know their exact number. It can be any number between 150,000 to 250,000. Some of them still live in open areas such as tents and camels, and live in some illegal settlements, such as the one we see over here. They're Muslims by their faith, but they're not considered to be, but they're different from the Arab culture because they are more nomads. Some of them, from the beginning, from the start of the land of Israel, some of them have been moved by the state of Israel to an urban cities, and others chose to go back to an open area. The Bedouin are fascinating. They have fascinating stories. For me, always when I'm driving and I'm showing and I'm pointing out for my clients the Bedouins places, so I'm always emphasizing that this is how the land used to look like in Jesus' time. Same as their form of life. They're living outside with their goats, with their ships, in tents. So trying to imagine Abraham hosting the angels, if you want to imagine that, you want to go to Bedouin hospitality, and that's the closest that you can get to it. Yeah, and then we have like few more minorities, and now I'm going to end up with that, the Circanians, which are only a few thousands of them. There are 2 villages of them. They don't really hold a major part in the population of Israel, even though the captain of the football team is a Circanian. So yeah, these are. So I was trying to give you also the diversity of the minorities. As I said before, there are 4% of minorities. Circanians are the one I ended with, but the Bedouins, they are major. They are like more major minority. There are about almost 250,000 of them. The Druze, who are 160,000, and they are going hand by hand with the lands of Israel, and they believe in the tradition of Israel, and they're keeping loyalty to the land of Israel. And also the Christians, which have their freedom to practice their religious, which is not something that you can take for granted if you compare it to a situation in Egypt, Jordan, and other countries around us. All right, guys, I'll be happy to hear your question if you have any. I know it was a lot of places and a lot of info. So you feel free to unmute yourself, and I'll be happy to hear your feedbacks, any kind of feedback.
Would you spell that word? Is it D-R-U-I-D, Druids? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's D-R-U-Z, Druze. Maybe you can add Druze, yeah. Maybe you can add E in the end, but basically it's Druze, D-R-U-Z.
Is that like an ethnic group, or is that?
So their story is that, yeah, it is an ethnic group. Their story is that they're affiliating themselves to Jethro, right? The father-in-law of Moses. He's their most important prophet. And they've been divided from Islam in the 11th century. They lived in Egypt. And for 20-something years, they were recruiting people. And then at that point, their leader been disappeared. At that point, he was a leader also of Egypt, and he was disappeared. And they started to be persecuted by the Arabs. So they've been scattered all over the Middle East. Basically, they live in mountain area because it was a necessity for them to defend themselves from persecution. And that is why in Israel, you can find them in the Galilee Mountains.
Okay.
Druze.
Druze. Okay.
Guys, any other question?
Are the Druids, do they have rights as Israelis?
Oh yeah,
Are they part,
yeah,
of,
they
your,
do
are they
have.
part of your military?
So all the citizens in Israel have the same rights, even though, if we're already opening that for discussion, about a year and a half ago, the government with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, they passes a law of which defined Israel as a Jewish state, and which before that it was already part of the idea, but it was not constituted under the law. And the Druze felt they'd been betrayed because it's gave them the feeling that they are second degree citizen, while they're doing everything the same. You know, they go to the military, they serve in combat units. Now, basically, there is no actual difference even after that law been constituted, but it's just a tension that I started with. I started the whole conversation with the idea that there is a tension with the terms of democracy and a Jewish state together, because a Jewish is an ethnic, obviously, or a religious. It depends how you look at it. And democracy, you know, it's like it's the idea that everyone are equal. So, but you know, overall, they can serve in any kind of position. They have generals in the military. They have politicians on high ranks. So, and if someone can feel that there is some kind of glass, or how you define it, like a glass barrier for him to pass, any kind of border, they can go and can put they can use the judicial systems to defend him. So by the law, everyone's supposed to be everyone's supposed to be equal.
But they're the ones you said that when they're like 13, they can decide if they're going to be religious or not.
Yeah, exactly, precisely. Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah.
weird. Can you imagine?
Yeah, it is interesting, guys. I recommend you to later, if you still have energy and time, check on YouTube Druze reincarnation, right? And then it's incredible. They strongly believe in reincarnation, and you can see some stories about them of youngsters sitting between two families. One, it's from their present life. The other one, it's a family that they believe that was from their former life. There are some incredible stories about it. Super, super interesting. And we can find Druze in the Galilee area and also in the Golan Heights.
Okay.
In Israel, there is also, it's very common also to do Druze hospitality. So it's also a great way to get exposed to that form of life.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I noticed, if everybody, like particularly on your little short weekly ditties, if everybody will share those on Facebook, it's interesting. I saw this morning, one of my friends from Del Rio shared it also. So it helps Adiel get this out.
Definitely, definitely. Oh, it's on Facebook. Yeah, now it's all over. But it's fascinating. I truly recommend you to follow their stories, and you know, obviously we could sit here all day and, you know, could keep talking about the Bedouin culture, which is also very fascinating, and the Circanians, and go deeper into ultra Orthodox and et cetera. But yeah, you know, this is part of the magic part of Israel, magic side of Israel, the diversity, and most of the time everyone are getting along, most of the time.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Okay, let me just end up the